three pedals you need, right? So everybody does these like clickbaity topics on YouTube, and I think we're going to do some more of this kind of stuff because I think they're fun to have these kind of conversations with one another. But three pedals you need. So number one pedal you need. So, or should we go backwards? Like third pedal you need, right? Like third.
Yeah,
most.
let's go from number 3. You always have to go from number 3, otherwise people don't listen to the end.
Well, this is going to be really good because like when you hear my third one, you're going to be like, what the hell are the other two? And I would say my third most needed pedal is probably overdrive. And I don't know how you feel about that, Jim. We could kind of take two tacks. So like you can listen to Jim or you can listen to me on this and we'll just kind of debate it. I'll tell you why overdrive is number 3. And I think that everybody should use an overdrive, right? So like we're just going to talk about the pros and cons of it. You should have an overdrive on your board because it serves a couple purposes. Now it has to be the right overdrive for your situation, whatever your amp is, whatever your guitar is. But basically your overdrive is what allows you to control your lead boost. So when you have to step up and you have to play a part that's going to put you out in front of the band, and I'm not just talking about leads, even if it's a rhythm part, you got to have a little bit of a boost. Now, if it's a volume boost or a gain boost, really depends on how you use it. But the overdrive, the reason why I didn't say a boost pedal is because the overdrive actually allows you to get some dirt. So if you really want to do a gain boost, you can. Otherwise, you can just turn the gain all the way down, turn the volume all the way up on most overdrive pedals, and you're still going to be able to kick it up a notch. And on top of that, if you need to cut differently in the mix when you're doing this, you got a tone control usually. So that's why I think it's critical. I would put it, I actually hesitated because I was like, this should probably be number 2. But we'll talk about number 2. And I think I'm going to catch some flack for number 2, but I really do think overdrive should be your number 3. Jim, what is your number 3?
Well, can we say the same thing?
Yeah, sure.
So actually, you know what my number 3 is? I'll tell you what my number 3 is. Believe it or not, my number 3 is a delay. I think that it's a have to have, completely, totally have to have it. But I have 2 other pedals that are more important than that. But when it comes to the 3, once you hear all 3 of them, delay fits right there in the number 3 slot. Whenever I go to a solo, 99.9% of the time, I'm going to have delay in it. And there is some chord work that I do that I'll have a delay on, especially if it's like chords where I'm letting them ride, like, half notes or whole notes. It gives them fullness that really kind of needs to be there and keeps them alive. So delay for me, number 3.
Okay. So for number 2, and this is assuming this is a gigging board, right? Because
Yep.
number 2, if it were not a gigging board, I would probably say something like a looper, just because it's going to allow you to, if you ever play with anybody else, it's going to allow you to play with something else other than yourself. And just trying to like make stuff work without having chords behind you and that kind of thing, which is abysmal. But
Yep.
I kind of gone back and forth on this, and I've actually thought about this quite long and hard. And so I think there's actually a couple of valid answers for number 2. I think for me, I'm going to share my valid answer. I think the second most important effect for me is probably actually wah. And I know people would be like, what the hell? Why would wah be in the middle of that? So think about it this way. Going back in the echelons of time, back to New York and, Manny's music and that era in the 48th Street scene, people were going in and they were getting pedals, and there really wasn't a whole lot of availability. There was fuzz, which is like primitive drive, basically. And then there was wah, right? That was the next thing that came out. I think tremolo may have been in there and stuff in some capacities as well. But wah was like the next big craze. And I think the reason why I hold it so dear and important is because a lot of the music I listen to, a lot of guys were going guitar, wah pedal, amp. and there literally wasn't a whole lot of other stuff going on because it didn't exist. Maybe there was a fuzz pedal, maybe there wasn't, and it depends. But the wah pedal was ubiquitous, and it stayed that way. I mean, look at Slash. Guy doesn't use anything on the floor except he has a wah, rack mount wah. And pretty much everybody who's anybody has one and uses it for some part of their set. Now, I know that there is a specific subset of guitar players today that hates wah pedal, and they don't have them on their board, and they don't like them. I don't use them every time I play out. In fact, this little tiny board that I would take to an open jam or whatever, I'm not gonna have a wah on it. But in my set, if I was playing like my music all night long, yeah, I'd use a wah probably 3 or 4 times in 10 songs, and for like big sections, because it's one of those very special effects that you can use for a lot of things. The other reason is because it actually takes the place of a modulation. So if you could use a wah and you can sweep it slowly, you can kind of get away with not having a phaser, and that kind of stuff. So the other honorable mention, Jim, actually is delay, which you mentioned. But I actually think that I can get away now without a delay, provided my amp has reverb. If my amp has reverb and it's a quality reverb, I don't necessarily need delay because it's all I'm using it for is like adding space to something.
Yep.
And then if for anything, like I know a lot of people are like, well, you can't tap tempo or reverb. No, you can't. But the reality is I don't use tap tempo all that much. I hope to change that. Hint, hint. But that's a whole other conversation, ball wax, in terms of why that would hit the number 2 spot. So, Jim, what's your number 2?
My number 2
is it Brown.
That's interesting. That's interesting because you mentioned the wah. Not that that's my number 2, but I definitely use it almost every single gig. So, especially in a band context, I use it quite a bit.
Do you know why I think it gets hated on? I started to interrupt, but you know why I think wah gets hated on? I think it's because it's big. I think all these modern players want small rigs. They've had this drilled in their head. You gotta have a flat rig and all this crap. And if I have to mount this thing on my board or I have to carry a separate device with me, this is a big pain in the ass. And like that's why I think that tradition is kind of dying out. And there are so many people out there like, oh, I hate wah. It's cheesy. It sounds like whatever. I mean 40, 50 years worth of guitar music recorded with the wah. I don't think it's that cheesy. I think people are just maybe somebody's bored with it, but I also think people are looking for excuses not to have to carry it.
I think that's part of it, definitely. Personally, I like wah, but I've been, as I've said, I've had a love-hate relationship for a lot of years with it. Mostly because not because of its size, but because I wasn't good at it. Wah is almost like owning.
You got to use it a lot.
And you got to practice with it. You've got to learn subtleties of wah. Wah doesn't mean you have to do this all the time, and I think that's something that people do when they play a wah. Is they're constantly hitting it and moving it fast, where you can do little movements and kind of bring it.
Or you can even just use it like when you do a swell in a solo where you got like a bend, you can wah up during the bend and don't roll all the way back and just kind of play some more stuff and just use it appropriately to heighten what you're doing. The master of that is probably Slash. So,
and that's that's a great thing to use. So my number 2, we're kind of getting into the category of what a pedal is, because I use a compressor and I use it as a boost. So my compressor, which if somebody said, Jim, I use an EQ, hey, that's, all the good for you. I've thought very seriously about going EQ boost versus compressor boost to shape the wave when I boost it. We've talked about that in the past, where if you bring a wave and you kind of set it so that you're taking some of it, rolling some of that high end off, and getting
you're talking about frequency, not really like the wave itself, not amplitude, but you're talking about frequency.
That's what I mean. Yeah, frequency. wave. Taking some of that high end off, taking some of that low end, giving it a little bit of that mid range in the right place boost. I That's what I use it for, and every single solo I use, I always go with a well, right now my Keeley Compressor Plus.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're using a Compressor Plus, and so
Yep.
to give because I understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what you're saying. You're using the compressor to take a little bit off the attack, because the attack is where it emphasizes most of your treble frequencies. So by having a slow attack, it's taking off some of the pluck, which is allowing the meat of your sound to come through a little bit more, and therefore a more pronounced mid range.
Yep.
So it's different than using an EQ to do it, but you can do it both ways. I think the EQ. So like a lot of people shy away from compressors because they want all the dynamics, and that's kind of why I don't use them all that much. But it's definitely something that I have tinkered with, and for certain styles of music, like especially music where you're playing more clean, compressor is very helpful because it adds in. So like if you've ever played a gig, well, actually I was having conversations about this with someone the other day. If you play a gig, and if you played a gig without any drive, so the amp is just completely neutral clean, it is freaking hard. When you get to the end of the third or fourth song in like a 12-song set or a 15-song set, you're like, holy shit, my hands hurt. Because you have to work so much harder to keep the sustain going and to keep the notes resonating properly and just being generally cleaner about your playing to get through something. And you can't rely on muting for that in the same way that you can when you're using an overdrive or something of that nature. So having a compressor gives you some of that back because it evens out your you don't have to be, you can be a little sloppier with the right hand, and actually a little bit sloppier with the left hand too, because it's a little bit more forgiving. That's my two cents on it. I had actually gone back and forth in Old Stumpy about whether I was going to use compression or not, because I knew that if I had to play clean, compression would have given me plenty of wiggle room in terms of what I could get away with. So. Yep.
I find it big. All right, what's your number one?
Number one, a tuner. And everybody knew I was going to cop out and say it was a tuner. I'm sure everybody was like, he's pulling a fast one. And so like, I know people are like headstock tuners. So I guess like I can give you an alternate too. But here's why I say tuner, right? So not just because, so like, and the modern tuners are different, obviously they're different styles, but I always go for a tuner with a buffer, because then it handles two roles. You can have a 20-foot cable going into your power supply or to your pedal board, and then coming out with a 5-footer or 10-footer, and it'll drive that signal into the amp. Whereas, and I know people are like, yeah, but you use fuzz. And I do. That's why I have the TU3, because when I want to use the fuzz face, I can hit the buffer off and go for it. And actually, the TU3 Waza. And actually, where mine's at in my rig, I can actually run the sun face even without the buffer turned off, because my sun face is actually later in the chain. It's actually after all my drive pedals. So as long as I'm running a clean signal, I can tune. And what I want to do eventually is I'm going to get a switching board going at some point, and then I'll have the tuner off on its own Y, so it'll be always on, and I don't have to mess with it anymore. And I don't have to worry about buffers for my front effects. Now, I'm going to say something that's heresy, and that people will like. I'm sure people are going to crucify me over saying this, but in terms of your board, when you have it laid out, because we're talking about buffers, in terms of having your board laid out and having no buffer, I'm actually a big proponent of no buffers before the amp. And I know people are like, you should have a buffer because you've got so much signal degradation going from guitar to pedals to amp. And I have discovered, because of the guitars that I play inherently being bright and my sensitivity to it, I'd rather actually want that impedance loss. I'd rather lose some fidelity going into the amp. Where I do want a buffer is the effects loop, and I do run stuff in the effects loop. So, if your effects loop is not already buffered, get buffers, because you want one coming out and you want one going in, so out of your pedal board and then back into the amp. You want that whole signal chain to be pristine. Which even, like, I know a lot of people don't do this, but if you got the cash, if you're going to have an effects loop, put it on a separate board and just stick it right up next to your amp, or stick it on top of your amp or behind it, and just leave that stuff so you can trigger it when you need it, but just leave it on and leave it with a short cable run. Because you really don't, as long as you're not switching things on and off, you really don't need it in front of you. Actually, I toyed around with the idea of using MIDI pedals to put in your loop so you can switch them on and off via some sort of MIDI control scheme and not have to worry about. You could have a MIDI cable running out to your board and a controller on it, so that you don't have to worry about your signal loss. But that's a whole other aside. The tuner is the main thing. If you had to tell me, like, you got to give me an alternate number one, I mean, honestly, I'd probably say buffers, like I've been talking about here. But I can't really think of anything else that I would place as more important. I can tell you that number 4 would probably be some sort of modulation pedal, and it likely, because of me, it would be a Univibe, but basically a phaser, Univibe, something. And I'd actually would say something you could put preamp, and the reason I say that is because you sometimes need to put motion into your guitar parts, but just have no vibrato and stuff. And so having something that can modulate the signal is really, really useful to keep the listener interested in what's going on with the song. And if it's stereo, that's even better. If you could split out to stereo amps, but generally, I want to find something that can go pre-drive, because I think it's more organic sounding for that specific purpose. Now, if you got multiple modulation pedals, then you can start throwing stuff in the loop and getting all crazy with it. But for me, I prefer a Univibe. I prefer to go pre-drive into the amp, and then that's my thing. So that would be number 4. I don't really think that would count in place of number 1, because I wouldn't, like, I'm not going to an open jam with my amp and a Univibe. That's just not going to happen. Like, it's going to be, there's going to be drive, a tuner, and actually there may not be a tuner on this board, because same reason I said our listeners would be like, but you can use a headstock tuner. Yeah, you can use a headstock tuner. I'm not a big fan of headstock tuners. I've had some horrifying moments with them where you can't see them because of where your headstock is at. And at least on the PRS, they don't really mount on there very well because there's not enough surface area to really clip them on. And if you get a headless guitar, that's a problem. You can still get a clip-on tuner on a headless guitar, but it's just not it's not ideal. So I don't think headless or the clip-on tuners are the perfect answer. I think a pedal tuner is superior for that, and especially one with a buffer in it. A switchable buffer is A-okay in my book, and of course the Boss one. The reason why I love it is it's like it's even got a damn 9-volt power supply in it. So if you're powering that thing, you can run a daisy chain right off the pedal. Makes it super easy. So, Jim, what's your number 1? Did I steal it?
No. Well, you did, but you did it number 3. My number 1 is a boost. My number 1 is definitely a booster. I can tune by ear. I can have somebody say, give me an E, and I can tune, or I can use a headstock tuner and then take it back off, because that's what I do.
So you trust other people. That's why you didn't use a tuner for number 1.
Yep.
I don't.
So, and if I'm the only guitar in the band, guess what? I'm in tune. So I go to the Angus Young School of Tuning, but I come from a long line of not having tuners.
Yeah.
I had a pitch pipe in my pocket from years ago. So
I can tune by ear
somewhere.
too. I just prefer not to. Yeah. I mean, and I'm very familiar with getting a guitar in tune with itself, but when you're on stage with a bunch of people, I don't trust other people to have tuned their instruments. And I have definitely been in
even-
situations where they're, oh yeah, I'm in tune, and then they strum a G chord, and you're like, holy shit, that's not in tune.
Yeah. But I can say, okay, check your tuning. Because I can hear if somebody's out of tune.
Yeah, but I'm afraid, because like the situation I get in, I don't know these people, and I'm always afraid they're gonna be like, you're an asshole, you know, like. As I said, I don't trust other people.
Yeah.
I don't trust them to be good human beings.
I've got to look at the fact is there's never going to be a situation where I don't have some kind of tuner,
Right,
something,
right. And that
something
makes
to
sense.
which I can use reference. And so if you're going to, if I'm going to be stuck where I have to choose a pedal, it's going to be an overdrive pedal. Lately it's been my Tumnus.
Yeah, right.
That thing is staying on almost all the time.
Yeah, and you run a Marshall, and the whole like clawing into a Marshall thing is like really, really a lot of people's forte. So
right, and it's really subtle. I mean, I turn it on, and people go, I'll play without it. And they go, oh, that's good, and I play with it, and they go, oh, that's better. So it's not bad. It's kind of like, what is that? It's kind of like putting a little mayonnaise on a sandwich. I mean, it's not going to be a bad sandwich, but it's going to be a better sandwich, as long as the meat's good. But the point is that I'm just trying to lay that down. Now, if you ask me to choose number 4, it's probably going to be a wah pedal.
yeah,
And that's, how do I say this? When I was at the gig, the bottom row of my pedal board is all drive. There's the Muffaletta now. There's the Paisley Drive Deluxe, Paisley Deluxe, the Ratsbane, the Tumnus, and the 5050, which kind of has to go. I kind of got to switch those because the Tumnus needs to go after the 5050. So if I can shape the 5050 if I want. But the point is, those are the pedals on the bottom row. Those are all drive pedals. Every freaking one of them. I mean, a fuzz is a different kind of thing, but they're all drive/distortion. They're all
right.
Coloring the sound in a way that gives it
More grit.
Grit, right. Different kinds of grit. But I showed the guitar player that I played with, he goes, what do all those things do? And I said, I'll show you. Now, I brought the Twin because I didn't want to bring the Marshall out because it was really hot, really muggy.
Right.
Saturday, and we got rained on, and we might get rained on. I knew we were going to get rained on. We did get rained on. I'm okay with that thing being rained on. I'm not so okay with this thing being rained on, especially with the tubes being hot. That's all I need.
Yeah.
So I made a logical decision to do that. But as I hit him, each one, and I had him plug his guitar in and play through my rig. And he goes, oh, I see now. I see. And so he's a no pedal guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm building his first pedal board.
I just gotta say, that's all going to change for him because he's going to be like, oh.
Yeah. And he asked me, he said, can you build me a pedal board? I said, yeah. And he goes, all right, we're going to design it because he's picking the pedals, but we're going to design it and then I'll put it together for him. And it's funny because we talked. He's been trying to talk me out of my 335 since he played it.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, so the fact is, he goes, you know how to set those up so it's just a
little bit of extra.
Because everybody, he goes, geez, even your fuzz is not overly fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, but I get it now because I said, okay, think John Fogerty solo after CCR, run through the jungle and all that stuff. Think that and then play a little bit, see what you're thinking. And when he started playing, he goes, oh, I see. And then I said, now put that Paisley Drive on. He goes, I already know I like the Paisley Drive. He goes, but sure. And then he hit it and he went, wow, that's really, it's very subtle. And I sit down and I tuned those to go with the Fender when I got there because that's a very different thing.
Right.
Most of them don't even get used. The Tumnus just adds a little bit of something for the Marshall. The rest of it is the Marshall switching channels. And I love the Marshall in that it's got a effects loop that I can turn on and off. But he asked me, he goes, so he was talking about his phaser, and he goes, yeah, my phaser doesn't sound good through the effects loop. I said, don't use it in the effects loop. He said, I thought I was supposed to use it. I said, no. It's effectively a wah pedal.
You can, or you can't. It depends on. And some of them really work better in the loop than others.
Effect, yep. Right.
It's like a phase 90 out front, phase 45 out front, phase 100 out front. But if you're going to go into like the Boss phasers, put them in the loop.
In the loop. Right.
That's a big part of it, is like, who designed it and what were they thinking when it came out?
Right. And I can't remember what it was, but it's very Phase 90-esque. It's a boutique version of the Phase 90 script.
Yeah, okay.
And so doing a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely don't put that in the loop.
It was not, and I told him, I said, that's going to sound like shit in the loop. And I go, you could try it in the loop, see what you think, but you're probably going to like it out front, because it's going to be, it's more of what a wah pedal is doing to your sound than what you're thinking is doing to your sound. And so that's why I think you should do that. And so anyway, and then he messed around with the board. And that's, I think, going beyond what we're talking about there is some people think they don't want effects. I was that person for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't think I wanted effects. And then I started talking to people like you and realizing that you can be subtle. It's like when you take the salt shaker and you put salt on your food, you don't have to sit there and do this. Yeah,
I'm still learning. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert at that. Like, I'm still learning. Right, I'm still learning the subtlety thing, because so like on the board that I've got sitting next to me, I have the Golden Boy, but I have the gain at like less than half. Right. And then I have the BB preamp, and that's at less than half. It's way down at Tube Screamery territory, and yep. I'm rolling stuff off more than I'm adding ever, and just trying to make sure that everything just adds a little bit of character to the thing after it. And that's basically how you make a pedal board work. And I'm not great at it, but I'm getting better, and I learn more stuff every time I try a new combination.
Yeah. And that's what I do. I tweak a little bit. How does that sound? And this is a little something for the folks that are kind of getting into their pedals and trying to tweak a little bit, is don't try to do it all at once. Take a break. Your ear gets fatigued. Your brain starts telling you things you're not actually hearing. Because if you ever walked away,
I apologize about the BB preamp. I said it wasn't a Tube Screamer. It's very firmly planted in Tube Screamer territory, and it was because my ears were fatigued.
Yeah. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I railed about it on the last episode. It's not a Tube Screamer in the sense that, like, oh yeah, it's a Tube Screamer. It's got a lot more gain, but it's very smooth, right. And there's a lot more Tube Screamer lineage in that pedal than I had let on.
Right. And I think that's the important thing, is to realize that, sometimes it's best to walk away, maybe even for a day, sometimes at least 20 minutes to an hour, and sometimes for a day to walk away and just come back and go, don't change your settings. And
let your ears recharge.
Let the ears recharge. Find that spot. And sometimes it might be the amp. It might be maybe you're going to have to tweak a little bit there. But it's more important to remember that you can't get caught up in what you're hearing in that very second, because things change. And I'll tell you, when you stand, so I stand next to another guitar player. We've got our amps, this far apart, maybe 3 feet, 4 feet. And when you've got your guitar and your amps sitting next to each other, and he's got a high-end Marshall-esque boutique amp. I've got my Marshall usually with his. That's a very... So I've gotten to where I've started to play the 335. That's not why it's not hanging up. I'm playing the 335 more because it has a voice that completely offsets. He's got an R7 and an 05 Gold Top 50s relic, early Murphy Labs thing, and I've got the Les Paul. My Les Paul and his Les Paul do not clash, right? Goldie does, or Pearl does, but Veronica does not. But to give a real, you know, push against to each other, I go with the 335 sometimes, and that really. They're literally the cases are literally sitting on top of each other. That case is sitting on top of the 335 case, but the 335 case has the 335 in it. I took this one out to to do some weighing, but the point is that what I'm trying to do is find a place where I sit in that entire mix. We talked about that before. If you find a great tone at home, it may suck.
It will suck at practice.
Yes. Yeah. I should have used.
It's not will. Can. It will. Trust me. If you've been through that situation and your ears are not adept enough, you're gonna just disappear in the mix. And I play with guys like that all the time. Yep. Their tone at home is awesome. There was a guy that came in. He's a great player, like really accomplished player, can do all this technical stuff. He brought in a PV Viper 212. Loud little amp, but like had it dialed with no mids, and he sounded like hot garbage. You could not hear him at all.
Okay, so if you took it out of the mix, let's talk about that just for a minute.